Alright, hello again to anyone watching these Kaijudo videos. Today I am back with the part 2 of the Eye of the Storm complete set review. This time I will be discussing the cards from the Water Civilization, commons through rares. So, starting things off, we have Abyssal Engulfer, which is 5 mana 4K. You clash whenever he attacks. And if you win the clash, each player chooses up to 2 cards in their discard pile and puts them on the bottom of their deck. So, kind of a weird card for sure. Has maybe some combo uses or synergy potential. At first I thought it was really interesting as a way to hate on your opponent's graveyard, but the fact that it's choose up to 2 and your opponent has a choice means like it's just not actually hating on their graveyard whatsoever. So super weird card for that reason. Maybe like the interesting uses you could have for this card, or like maybe shuffling back in, or not shuffling back in, but adding cyber scamps that died to the bottom of your deck. Not even sure too much beyond that. Like there's just not much going on here. You could also maybe stack cards to the bottom, like if maybe you just play a bunch of early drop spells, you stack, or you put some of those cards on the bottom of your library, and then later in the game you play like a changeable Urgle, and then you can name one of those, like maybe you play like one of Logo Scan, one of Thought Collective, some of these other kinds of cards, and you just you name one of those, draw the whole deck, and then do something with that. But super niche applications. And overall, the ultimate thing here is that it's just a clash card, so it's not even going to work a lot of the time. So one of the other annoying things about this too is like, if you like, this could be a cool build around where it does something unique that not a lot of other cards in the game do. So that's kind of appealing, and it would be a fun card to try to mess around and find ways to exploit it. But at the end of the day, it's just not really, like, you have to jump through all these hoops to try to find bad ways to use this card in cool ways. But you can't even do that half the time because you're just going to lose the clash and your whole deck will fail. So it's just super annoying that these kinds of like cool build around effects are just tacked on to clash mechanics where you can't even do the dumb things you want to do, and it's not like it's even going to be an issue. Like the kinds of things that you would try to exploit with this card probably aren't going to be competitive whatsoever. So it just kind of like, it almost does this weird thing where like they put a window over like a locked door. They put a window pane on a locked door, and then they let you see all these like toys in the other room that you can't get to, and it's just sort of annoying in that way. But at the end of the day, it's just going to be a bad card regardless of whether or not it has clash or not. But very weird effect. Next up, we have Ambassador to Coral. So 5 mana 4K, enters the battle zone, and you draw a card. So something to take note of there. Just a decent floor on the card. And we'll reveal for clash. The card is level 10. The problem with this card is, I mean, it's just not really outperforming something like Master Trader Cephalia, which is just such a good draw card. That card always draws one as well. It has half the power, but I mean, you're going to be drawing twice the cards most often, or more than that. Like Cephalia will be like a pretty consistent draw 2, draw 3, even draw 4 in the types of decks that are built around it. And Coral is just not really reaching that ceiling, unfortunately. So I don't really see this card being playable, unfortunately. At 5 mana is just a bit too expensive. But I mean, not the worst card by any means. Next up, we have Caustic Tack. So 6 mana 6 drop. When it enters the battle zone, you can clash, and if you win the clash, each of your creatures can't be blocked this turn. So not really a good card by any means. Another card where maybe you're trying to set it up as like a win condition where you're facing down a bunch of blockers and you want to get through that turn, and unfortunately you just whip the clash and it does nothing. So kind of annoying. But it would be like a decent limited card for that, and it gives you the sweats in limited where you're trying to, maybe if you win the clash, you win the game, and if you lose the clash, you lose, or something like that. Like that's kind of what these clash cards amount to in limited, but not really getting there in constructed whatsoever. Also sort of weird that it's not on attack, because you can't really ever use this card as like a potential unblockable creature, so that's kind of weird to me, but whatever. Next up, we have Cybertech Restraints, which is a super weird shield blast, just 2 mana, Start of your next turn, target enemy creature can't break shields. So doesn't solve any issues long term, doesn't set your opponent back in tempo really, it doesn't set their battle position whatsoever, it doesn't generate any mana, it loses you mana, but stops an attack. Purely defensive for that reason, can't even stop your opponent's creature from attacking yours, so don't really see a world where this card is actually good whatsoever. Super weird card though. Logos Curator, actually a card I really like in this set. So 4 mana, 3000 power. If you have a spell in your discard, you can draw a card. So it seems weird to maybe call this card out as being good when I just kind of talk down to the core isle, but the difference is like the draw scales up so heavily when you scale down the mana cost. So like a 3 mana 2000 like a 2 mana 1000 that drew a card would be absolutely absurd. A 3 mana 2000 power that draws a card when it enters would be amazing. 4 mana 3000 still really good. 5 mana 4000 you start paying too much mana and it scales down. But 4 mana 3000 power I think is at a nice spot. It might be a little expensive, but 3000 power is sizably better than something like Hydro Spy. So it could still be a nice card, like as a bait for evolutions, a card that can contest the board a little bit better. So I think there's potential here. Not sure if it's actually going to be, it probably still won't be maybe a good enough card on the whole, especially because it does fit into very specific decks. Like you're going to want to play it in decks with Logo Scan and Mesmerize, but I think there's definitely potential here. Like this is a strong card, but it would need the right home to really make it fit. For sure. But a card I like. Mind Matrix. This card I don't like whatsoever. 3 mana. Whenever one of your creatures attacks this turn, you can draw a card. So it kind of gives you the Finbar effect. So not really good on curve whatsoever. I mean, the easy comparison with this card is Logo Scan, which will always draw 2. So if you're going to play this over Logos, you want to be drawing multiple cards, like 3 or 4 plus. So you need a big board state. So you're going to want to be playing this like sort of on the later card turns when you would play a Finbar. The difference is like for this card to be good, you have to be playing this plus like a 3-drop in the same turn. Otherwise, you would just play Finbar because Finbar plays a board, plays a body, plays a bounce spell, and draws you cards all the turn it enters. Whereas Mind Matrix just draws. And like the benefit is that it's a cheap card, so you can pair alongside something else. But playing this plus a 3-drop is so much worse than just playing Finbar. So that's one of the annoying things. So it's just not really going to see play because it's trying to do that Finbar role as just a much worse card. And then when you compare it to Logo Scan, if you do want a card draw spell like this, which is speculative, like you're not playing Logo Scan in these kind of attacking tempo decks anyways, but Mind Matrix, like if you were to play one of Mind Matrix effects, you'd probably just play Logo Scan because like Logo Scan you can still play on curve. Like if you miss your 3-drop and you need something to do with your mana, Mind Matrix is just like a brick in your hand. Like you're just going to have to play it as your mana drop, but you could play Logo Scan and get the +1 in the early game. So like it has a little bit more use cases than Mind Matrix, and it can still be a nice, like when you have a huge board advantage, it's not like you need too much more to translate to a win. You don't need like a draw 4 off Mind Matrix. Like it could be good enough to just play that Logo Scan, and then play a card alongside it if you don't have Finbar. Like you could make that play, and drawing 2 is probably just fine enough in that spot. On another wrinkle there too is when you're making those late game pushes, if Mind Matrix is the last card in your hand, you're just spending your whole turn on this card, and you're not really leveraging the fact that it's only 3 mana. Whereas Logo Scan, you could play it, draw 2, and then if you draw another card you can cast, you can actually, you don't get the draws off Mind Matrix until after you've passed on the opportunity to cast the spells. Whereas Logo Scan, you can cast the spells you draw off of it. So just not really a card I think is particularly good for those reasons. Octolift here, worth looking at for sure. 8 mana, 6000 power, double breaker. If you have 2 or more spells in your discard pile, you can tap 4 or fewer mana to summon this card. So you could use things like Tenuous Trove or Spy Tide to get like basically 2 spells in your discard pile off 1 card, and that could be kind of cool to play this on curve. I just don't really see like the deck that would want to play those cards and play this in it. Kind of weird. Like maybe something with like, I don't know, there's like discard synergy decks, I guess. Like maybe you could play this with like Underworld Stalker effects too, and then just have a bunch of rewards for filling your graveyard, but it's just going to be kind of like a mediocre deck at that point. Like you could play Ramus the Cloaked, which I think is a card we'll talk about later in this set review, but that card kind of wants you to fill your graveyard with certain cards, and like that would reward playing Spy Tide as well. Like if you play Spy Tide, draw 2 cards, you can pitch a spell and then pitch something to rebuy with Rammus later in the game. And then you could also play Octolith as just like another like big body. Like this could be a cool deck, but it's just not really going to fit into like an actual competitive archetype in my mind. Like part of the problem with like the Agorix combo deck that I built is like you're just relying on a lot of these like really underwhelming early game cards to be your enablers, like Gloom Tomb and Vicious Coffers, that you just fall behind in the early game. And then but at least that deck can catch up with like super powerful like big fast attack plays with Snowbeard and Agorix. If you're taking your turns off to play stuff like Spy Tide and other things like that, maybe other cheap spells, like those cards are fine, but you're just kind of spinning your wheels, not really accomplishing much, which is a big problem in Kaijudo, where it's a pretty aggressive game for the most part. So I don't really see this card being particularly strong. And one of the problems with this whole cycle is even if you do put them out as 4 mana 6,000 power creatures, again, they don't really attack till turn 5. So the fact that they dodge Bone Blades can be really nice because they can be hard to out unless your opponent has Terror Pit. But the problem is 6,000 power just gets trumped by so many of the powerful Evos that a lot of decks are playing. It gets trumped by stuff like Lyra and Skycrusher out of Dragons. Like 6,000 power is just like not really enough to compete in competitive Kaijudo if you're trying to rely on this threat to like win you the game or something like that. Like it's just going to get outsized really quickly. Like it'll break a couple shields, but if your opponent doesn't have like the removal spell answer, which this dodges a lot of the removal, it's really easy to have a creature based answer to this kind of card. But this whole cycle of cards, I didn't really touch on this with Haven's Council, but this whole cycle of cards is just super cool. Like these commons that have these build around effects, and then like it's not really powerful enough to compete in a high power format, but it could be a power card in a lower power format. And they really want to make me like this, even like cards like Logos Curator, like all these cool build around commons, like they really want me to make me want to experiment with some kind of like pauper format where you could only play commons or commons and uncommons and things like this. Like these kinds of build arounds are like super intriguing because again, they're not really powerful enough to compete in general Kaijudo, but those low power formats are missing powerful cards that can really like win conditions and stuff like that. So these kind of cards could fill a void in those formats and really be really appealing. Like I know a 60-star format was something some people messed around with where you had to build a deck and you couldn't have more than 60 stars worth of rarity symbol across your whole archetype. I believe like promos were banned or something like that, or they counted with certain numbers. I'm not exactly sure, but like those kinds of formats were always really cool to experiment with. And then you could play some cooler cards that never got the chance to shine in competitive Kaijudo by building around with those. Like I built a bunch of decks with maybe rares and below. I think I've experimented with that format. So yeah, those kinds of formats would be really cool to explore, and this kind of card could shine in that kind of environment. So next up we have Thought Adept. So a 3-drop Cyberlord, and whenever you draw a card, it gets plus 2,000 power until the end of turn. So you can make this really big on your turn and attack through a bunch of blockers, but the problem is, it's too weak on your opponent's turn. So you're just not gonna it's not gonna survive against any of their attacking creatures. It just gets revenge killed by everything. It can maybe attack through a skirmish blocker by buffing it up, and then it just dies on the crackback. So not really good there. I know like the only reason I'm really entertaining this card whatsoever is just because like while I was building these kind of water-based Cyberlord decks, like the 3-drop slot was kind of light, but this card's just not better than Seneschal, and Seneschal was a card that like feels a little bit underwhelming for a lot of the reasons, just being a low power creature, but yeah, I thought that's just not getting there. It's not filling that void. Next up we have Tinkerer Tivster. So a card I definitely like for sure. Like it's 2 mana 1,000 power. You have to clash, but if you win the clash, you get to pick up a shield and put one down. So it gives you the Coral effect. So this card is definitely a build around style card, but it's not necessarily like as big of a build around as some of these other clash cards would be, just because like you're generally just going to play a deck with shield blasts in it, and you're going to be playing, so that this card is kind of just like you don't have to build around too heavily. On top of that, you already have an existing card, the Coral, like I mentioned, that has the exact same effect. So you already, like, if you whiff on this Tinkerer Tivster, your deck doesn't just lose functionality entirely because you still have Coral that can pick up that slack And more so, this card is there to pick up, to give you a little bit of potential redundancy on the Coral effect already. So it's not like your deck is just like completely flawed. Now, like maybe you it's not worth like it completely moving towards exploiting that synergy. Like maybe you would want to play Oathsworn Call in a Coral deck and try to really abuse Coral, but at the same time, Oathsworn's a bit of a clunky card. Maybe it's not worth playing 3 Oathsworn alongside only 3 Coral. So Tripster might be the extra boost to enable that synergy, to where you get like, maybe you're adding maybe like 1.5 extra cards that can add that Oathsworn to your shields. But at the same time, maybe Tipster is too inconsistent being a clash card that it's still not worth going full bore on that effect with Oathsworn. But one of the other benefits of this card is just the floor of a 2 mana 1000 power Cyberlord is just not that low. Like a 2 mana 1000 power Cyberlord is just a card you're going to play a lot of the time. Like I think Hypergrid Bandit was a card that even saw play in a lot of like the old school Alex Blue decks, just because they wanted the extra Cyberlord bait creatures that could attack. And that was just a straight up vanilla. So I mean, Cyberscamp is clearly the best of all the options, but after that, I mean, this card compared to Cyber Trader, I mean, if you get the effect, it's clearly better. Like, it's just the same effect, you just draw and discard, but the difference is you can discard a Shield Blast, and then it's like a Shield Blast sitting in your shield zone, rather than just being a Shield Blast in your discard pile. So, this card is just, like, a clearly better, way better Cyber Trader if it hits, but if it doesn't hit, then it's just a lot worse of a card. But I don't know if, like, I feel like when it hits, it's so much better than, it's enough better than Cyber Trader than it is, or it's more better than Cyber Trader when it hits than it is weaker than Cyber Trader when it whiffs. Because Cyber Trader digs you a card, but it doesn't generate card advantage. It lets you set up future plays, but a lot of the times, like, Cyber Trader's not really doing too much off of the looting effect. But so it could be worth just always playing this card over Cyber Trader if you're playing like at least like maybe like 6 or 9 Shield Blasts. Like, it's probably worth making that change. They would need some testing to determine that, but I think this card just totally fine. Just the floor, again, 2 mana Cyberlord bait creature, very high, probably, and then it would remain to be seen if it actually gets into decks over Cyber Trader in general, and it remains to be seen if it's really worth pushing the Shield Blast energy super hard alongside Coral, or if it's just maybe it's just a card, again, you make that upgrade to Cyber Trader, you play it in your deck because it's better, but you don't go super hard on the shield synergies. So not sure where this card will eventually land, but it's definitely a good card. So I like that. Next up we have Tripwire Teleport. So 3 mana, bounces an 8,000 or less if it's your turn, and if it's not, it only bounces 4,000 or less. So these bounce effects, like the solo bounce effects, just haven't really seen competitive play. Fail Vortex just fell off really quickly in the early days of Kaijudo. Ice Blades is like one of the only cards like of these bounce effects. I mean, outside of Piercing. Piercing is just like a very good card for sure, because it has the tap effect as well. It's just got so much use case, super powerful Shield Blast, all that sort of stuff. But just only bounce, like you can't really ever get the card out of it where you can with Piercing. So like Piercing is so much easier to leverage as like a defensive tool than Tripwire Teleport or other bounce effects would be. Now this card, compared to Ice Blades, which is, again, is like the one bounce spell that I've sort of played with, I think the 2 mana is probably too important. And even then, like Ice Blades in I've experimented with like the Water Fire Rush deck a fair amount now, and Ice Blades, I still don't think, I'm not sure I would actually have that in the final cut of that kind of list. I just think it's a little too underwhelming. Like, it's a nice Shield Blast in some spots, and it's nice as a card, and like the biggest reason that is good, and like the biggest reason you are casting it in game, was just that it's a 2 mana spell to pair with like a 2-drop on turn 4, or a 2 mana spell to pair with a 3-drop fast attack on turn 5. Like, the fact that it was 2 mana was super important when I was playing with the card. And I just don't really think Tripwire Teleport, despite having more targets on your turn and being able to have a little more versatility, the 3 mana is too big of a downside. And Ice Blades is barely a card that I'm considering running anyways. So I don't think this card is really going to get there in a competitive environment. But I think it's still probably one of the better bounce spells that we've seen compared to a lot of the other cards that are out there. So next up we have another interesting card here, Warp Sea Ray. So it's corrupted, which is really interesting. Shield Blast blocker, and when it enters, you can look at the top card and you may put it on the bottom of your deck. So super interesting to think about. So a Shield Blast corrupted could be really nice. Just being able to like blast out a corrupted body that's going to be super powerful when it just has all these other effects tapped on. Like it's going to be a lot more than just a 2k blocker. Like it's going to have untargetable by level 4 less spells, or when it attacks it can draw, and all these other effects that get tacked onto it. So just blasting out a corrupted creature can be a super big threat. Maybe one of the downsides is like the card, like it's a 6 mana card. There's already a bunch of top end stuff. When you're looking at like maybe I forget, Octobot or whatever, the 6 mana 4k corrupted that draws whenever you play corrupted, that card's like a big expensive water card. You have Warbringer Poseidon, a big expensive water card. So I don't know if this card, like it might be tough to slot into the deck itself, just because like there's not a lot of room. You want to be playing a more aggressive deck, and you have these few really powerful top end cards that are like the more expensive side of the deck, and then you want to round it out with some defensive Shield Blast. But I don't know if Warp Sea Ray is a powerful enough defensive blast. Maybe it just is because it fits on theme, so it could supplant whatever other considerations you might be making. So I could see it getting into a corrupted list, but I don't think it's a big enough addition to those decks to really make corrupted a good card, a good archetype overall. But I mean, it's a nice addition. Would probably make the cut in a lot of those corrupted decks, but don't think it's a great card overall. A little bit too underwhelming as just a blocker. Like if I wanted just a generic water Shield Blast creature, I would probably look to something like Cryonucleus over this card for sure. I think that card's a little more versatile, a little more powerful. So the last water card, Waterway Watcher, not too much to discuss here. It's an extra 1-drop guard blocker, which goes a long way for the Renegade Hero Finbar decks that might show up in the metagame. Like it's like it gives you more redundancy because you have Cyber Sprite and I think Aqua Initiate, and then now you have Waterway Watcher as well. So you have 3 sets of 1-drop blockers, which is really nice. Just more redundancy there goes a long way for Panopter style decks and Finbar decks, especially where they want to have guard blockers specifically. So it's nice redundancy there. It's got some advantages over the 2000 power blockers. Just the powerful block can be better in some spots, but then worse in others. So there's a trade-off there to be made. I'm not sure if it's exactly better or worse than those cards. I guess it's like worse against tap effects and stuff. It makes it easier to like trade when you're playing a rush deck. Like if you attack with one thing, they block with Waterway Watcher, and then you can attack over it with another. But maybe that's better than just like trading off with their 2-drop, because you eat 2 attacks. Because otherwise you attack with a 2k, they trade off their Cyber Sprite, and then you attack with your other 2k. In this case, like it's trading off, but it's taking 2 attacks away from the opponent. So probably a better card than some of these 2k blockers overall. But yeah, not really a bait for anything though. So probably only really going to end up seeing play similar to Aqua Initiate, where it just sees play in these like Panopter Finbar decks. So not too much to say overall. So that is the water section. I think the most intriguing cards, I think for me, Tivster, remains to see where that falls in these Cyberlord archetypes, but totally worth playing. Definitely would make the cut, but I don't know if it's like a huge upgrade. It would be a huge upgrade, and like opens up a lot of doors and avenues for deck design if it ends up being the case that it's worth building around. Like the clash happens just enough to be worth maybe exploiting the shield triggers even more than you otherwise would. But if that's not the case, then it's probably just like it may end up being a minor upgrade over Cyber Trader, or even a minor downgrade compared to Cyber Trader, and not end up seeing any play in the long run. But still a totally playable card. But outside of that, just Logos Curator is another card. Maybe it doesn't get there, doesn't find a good home. Maybe it's a little bit too slow at 4 mana. But I think it's a fine card. I forgot to talk about this guy. Just a vanilla, but not much to say there. So I think for me, the most exciting cards, Tivster, Logos Curator for sure, and Warp Sea Ray, I guess. Waterway Watcher is just kind of a lot more of what we already have. not too much of a unique effect. But Warp Sea Ray, kind of a cool card, but I don't know if it's actually going to be a good card by any means. I mean, it's going to really hinge on how good Corrupted is, and that's not really going to be, I don't think, really a competitive deck. So as always, let me know your thoughts on these cards, what you thought maybe the best cards were in Water so far. And yeah, as always, I hope you enjoyed watching the video, and stay tuned for the next video in this series, a continuation of the Eye of the Storm set review.